Howdy folks, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I am your host, the Mighty Bjorn, and today for you, I'm going to be talking a bit about drones. As well, I think this is a subject most people aren't talking too much about, and primarily the focus of the subject is going to be talking about the benefits of drones and also the flaws of drones in an SHTF situation, if you will. And I'm going to primarily talk about the benefits first. And realistically, what kind of brings this to bear is honestly the Ukrainian war. The Ukrainian war has definitely brought, if you will, the drones, the use of drones to bear, and has really brought how much attention, uh, how much of a force multiplier, especially when it comes to things like reconnaissance and the benefits of drones can be used in warfare. Understand that yes, I do have military experience, and when I was in the service, drones was actually a fairly new thing back in 2003. Um, we drones were around, but they really were not heavily used as much as they were today, and they're definitely really heavily used now. Because we got everything from reconnaissance drones to attack drones to EOD drones. Back in that time, we mostly had Predator drones and we had some EOD drones, but the amount of different types of drones out there has just reached ridiculous levels. So let's start with the benefits, and I want to say with the first benefit, this is more directed towards what if your SHTF situation is more weather based, such as heavy rains or a hurricane or a tornado, and I would actually say scouting roadways. Although scouting roadways is really useful for any situation, um, but I would say it's definitely probably going to be more useful for weather than anything else, or at least it's my thought basis is more directed towards weather than anything else, just because, well, weather is a constant SHTF situation, and I would argue that it's probably an SHTF situation for everyone, even for myself, even though I don't live in a floodplain, but where I live, from time to time, we do suffer flash flooding, and sometimes knowing what roads are closed is going to be important for me. I would also say scouting and patrolling rough area. If your SHTF situation leads you to go into, I don't know, some kind of campsite or a cabin up in the mountains or whatever, or maybe you already live in a rural area, yeah, the use of using a drone, I would say, is pretty obvious for scouting your area, especially when it comes to scouting different types of resources such as wild game, waterways, etc. Now, that being said, I would also argue, even, looking back at 2006, scouting riots. I would argue that this is even an SHTF situation, especially an SHTF situation that it seems like we have to suffer through every couple of years from lunatics, that this might be something that a drone would be useful for. Once again, scouting roadways. Okay, we got an SHTF situation. It's time to get out of Dodge. Where am I going to go? What route am I going to take? What's the safest path? And a part of figuring out that safest path might be literally scouting crowds, scouting riots, figuring out where's a safe place or safe area of travel. Also, in that in that same area too, scouting troop movements. If the SHTF situation involves, who knows, revolution, civil war, foreign invasion, scouting troop movements, I would argue, is definitely going to be really important. Uh, Especially from far away, and especially with the cameras they're putting on some of these drone nows, you can have a drone really far away, pretty much from almost out of sight from a person, or so far away that a person can't really see the drone at all without any aid, without binoculars or anything like that, and be able to discover any type of troop movements, friendly or enemy. So we'll just say in general terms with a lot of that, just your general bug out path, I would say is, figuring out your general bug out path is definitely really important for the case of using drones in an SHTF situation. But that's not going to be the only one. What about checking out an aftermath? What about checking out your neighbors or maybe reconning an area? Maybe you need to figure out where there's going to be a good place for supplies, or maybe figure out where there's going to be a good place to hunker down, or once again, figure out a good route to go. So there you go. Once again, scouting the aftermath, figuring out good direction to go, figuring out just what's up, more or less. Another thing I would even argue, especially once you get hunkered down, is surveillance and reconnaissance. I touched a bit ago about troop movements, following riots and different things of that nature. But once you get hunkered down, okay, in certain situations, you might have a lot of land that you're going to have to essentially keep track of. Are you going to be able to patrol that land on foot or with an ATV? I know in my situation I'm not going to be able to. So, in all honesty, the use of a drone might be a really good option in that scenario, and I would argue that that would be actually a good scenario, or a good use of a drone. Another thing would be even moving, delivering medical supplies, ammunition, food, water, etc. Drones are excellent for delivering stuff, especially some of the bigger, more modern drones. I mean, you even got Amazon delivering lightweight packages now. The military's even using drones to deliver medical supplies in a quick, fast hurry. If you got a team out in the field and someone gets seriously wounded and there's not enough medical supplies or improper medical supplies to stabilize them, you can always get medical supplies to your team out in the field really quickly. So there you go, medical supplies. What if your team runs short on food? What if your team runs short on water, etc., or ammunition? Anything along those lines, really. Although I would argue more than likely you would use it for medical supplies over anything else. Or, in another situation, what about as a carrier pigeon? Back in the day, to send messages back during World War One in particular, I can think of, which was was really important, and even World War Two, we used runners a lot, as well as World War One, we used runners a lot, and pretty much every war we've used runners. But essentially, whenever comms are down or comms are scrambled, whatever, we would use runners or we'd use carrier pigeons. Now, carrier pigeons was more of a World War One, previous World War One thing, or pre-World War One thing. So, they even used carrier pigeons during the Civil War. But essentially, you could use a drone as a carrier pigeon. What if something happens and you got a team out in the field and the radio dies? You can always use a drone to deliver a radio to them. So there you go. That's a great way of doing it. And another thing I would argue is even possibly a distraction. Maybe you're trying to get a team through an area and there so happens to be an enemy troop movement. Maybe you could use your drone as a distraction so that way your team could get moved through pretty quickly. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is potential problems with drones, and this is outside the parameter of drones being built with mostly lightweight plastic materials. They're breakable. I want to discuss other things outside of that, and this is kind of like the flaws with using drones. And one thing that comes to mind is network communications. A lot of stuff I hear about with drones, different types of like automated patrolling programs and stuff like that, all sounds like to me that it uses, or a lot of drones to use these type of features, uses network communications for that type of stuff to work. So network communications, if the network communications go down, which I would argue is highly likely in a scenario where maybe it's a war, enemy invasion, highly likely that that network communication is going to go down. and that may debilitate your ability to use any drones that you have. It may not, don't know. It'd be based on probably what type of drone you use, what type of programming you use, controls, etc. The next thing I would probably argue too is going to be hacking. Drones are definitely hackable devices. Um, I'm not sure how quote unquote unsafe they are or safe they are from being hacked, but it is definitely a risk that needs to be considered when considering using drones for different types of operations, and even the military has considered this themselves. So drone security is definitely going to be an important feature when you're looking into like purchasing a drone or whatever. You might want to think about what kind of security programming the drone has available to it, or what kind of security you can use to protect the drone from possible hacking. Another thing I would argue too that's going to be a problem with drones is going to be battery life. Most drones only have, my understanding is, roughly a half an hour of battery life, and then essentially you're going to be recharging said drone. And essentially it's going to vary from drone to drone. It's going to be based on the size, the type of battery. It's going to be based on the size and the type of the drone. It's going to be based on if the drone has a load on it or not, etc. But one thing that should be taken into consideration is the fact that it does have a battery, and said battery needs recharged. Are you going to be able to recharge it? Do you have a generator if your power goes out? Let alone, do you have the fuel resources to feed that generator? Do you have some kind of solar power backup system so that way you can keep charging that drone? That's all something that you need to think about when it, like, how operational, long term, short term, whatever else you need to think about when it comes to your drone. Now, with that being said, too, what if it's an EMP attack? Say if there's some kind of war, maybe civil war or civil unrest or revolution or foreign invasion, what if an EMP is used? So that might become a problem with your drone as well, in the sense of, uh, being able to recharge your drone as well as just being able to use your drone in general. Now, obviously, you could theoretically use a Faraday cage. I don't know how well that's actually been tested. I have, as far as I'm aware of, when it comes to the whole Faraday cage thing, that's realistically still just a theory that a Faraday cage would protect your electronics from an EMP. But if anybody knows for sure about that, go ahead, comment down below. But as far as I know, that's still just a theory. Another thing I would argue too, and this is one thing you really can't avoid, and of course this is going to be based on your drone, is night. You know, is your drone, the drone you purchase or the drone you think about purchasing, night capable? And this is something you should definitely think about when you're purchasing a drone. Because obviously the really cheap end drones, which would be great to get your feet wet, get practicing and learning how to use a drone, they're probably not going to be night and all weather capable. Of course, your more expensive drones, your $200-300 drones, they're more than likely are going to be night and all weather capable, or at least I would think they would be. But that's something to also keep in mind as well. Is your drone going to be night capable? Another thing I'm going to argue too that would be a serious issue for drones, and it's going to continue becoming a more and more major problem for drones, is going to be drone jamming. More and more militaries are getting more and more vested in the capability of jamming drones and hacking drones and etc. So that is something that needs to be thought about as well. And essentially, right now as things stand, there's just really no way around it as far as I'm aware of. Essentially, if they have the capability to jam your drone, they're going to jam your drone, because essentially what they're doing is they're using a signal to cut your signal from said drone. And essentially, I've seen a few different things, such as the Drone Buster here, which is more of an infantry answer to drone jamming. but mean essentially these, they're looking at very lightweight options that even can be used by infantry, as well as more mobile options when you start looking in the realm of vehicles. So different militaries, China, Russia, the United States, we're all looking at different types of drone jamming options, and that can definitely become a serious hamper on your drone operations during an SHTF situation, or at least it could. Another thing I kind of alluded to earlier, and definitely would be a serious problem, would be weather. Especially like if you're in Tornado Alley of the United States. Come on, if you live there or not, or if you suffer from hurricanes on a regular basis, or high storms, blizzards, etc. That's definitely going to cause problems with drones. That's another one of those things that is just, there's no way around that. Mother Nature is always going to screw with stuff. It screws with aircraft every day, helicopters, planes, etc. Flights are always getting canceled because of Mother Nature, and you're going to have the same issue with your drones as well. So that is something to also think about too. And the last thing I would actually argue as a flaw for those who haven't already invested in drones and been thinking about the whole, do I want a drone for SHTF, is, do you even have a drone now? Skill level. Do you have the skill to even use a drone? Do you even have any idea of how to use one? And like I said a bit ago, you can get drones for pretty cheap, and actually, kind of start building that skill now. Drones really aren't that hard to use, but you definitely got to get used to using them. You can't just pick one up and expect to use it, especially when you start looking into like the automated drone pathing programs and stuff like that, where you can set up patrol routes and return routes and the whole 9 yards. So my final thoughts on this whole using drones for SHTF is drones are extremely viable for SHTF, but there's also a lot of flaws that goes with it that needs to be considered when it comes to using drones. And it's kind of one of those things, everyone who's thinking about, oh, should I get a drone for SHTF? I would say, yeah, you probably should, realistically, because drones are cheap. There's really no reason not to, but there's a lot of things to also consider that could hamper how usable your drone's going to be or not going to be when it comes to an SHTF situation. But anyway, folks, I'm actually going to wrap up today's video at that. Hopefully you all enjoyed that, and if anyone's got any thoughts about using drones for SHTF, or maybe anyone out there who has drones can maybe recommend different types of drones that they personally used and can say, yeah, this is a type of drone that would be great for SHTF, and here's why, go ahead, comment down below. I think people would definitely really appreciate seeing that type of knowledge. We all really need to kind of stick together on this one and share knowledge with one another. But anyway, folks, thank you all very much for tuning in. Hopefully you all enjoyed the video. Like, comment, subscribe, all that stuff. That helps me out. Blah, blah, blah. Anyway, have yourself a wonderful day.